Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the first official episode of the NDP podcast. Now that we're past the trial run, I think is it fair to call it the first official one?
Yeah, the first episode was just the pilot.
The pilot, yeah, exactly. We got clearance from the TV studio. Yeah, so I am your host Fraser, and I'm joined again by the other host.
Hi, my name's Sam.
And the focus of today's episode, the first proper episode, we're going to start with the Distributist Classic. We're going to start right where it all began, and we're going to go back to Rerum Novarum, the encyclical published in 1891 by Pope Leo XIII.
Absolutely. So just to give everybody a quick rundown of what we're going to cover in this episode, we're going to start with myself and Fraser's journey through faith. I'll bring very quick philosophical arguments about how we can reach distributist principles even outside of a religious context. And then we'll move on to what Rerum Novarum, what it actually says. We're going to talk about why it was written. We're going to talk about laissez-faire capitalism and Marxism and the criticisms of both, obviously by quoting Rerum Novarum. And then we're going to move on to talking at the very end about some of the modern political developments that have happened in the last week or so. And yeah, we hope you have a nice episode with us.
So, we're starting off, as you said, by discussing our journeys through faith. The journey through faith, everyone's journey with faith should be something that they keep going their entire lives, really. You know, it's not something, once you begin it, it's not something you ever stop. At least,
Absolutely.
according to all the people I know who have been on a much longer journey than me through their faith.
So just to be clear, I'm not a Catholic yet. I was baptized at 18 in a Baptist church. I've attended a Catholic church for the last year and a half. I started my actual catechism yesterday. I think it's quite similar to yourself, Fraser.
Yeah, I've been going to church pretty regularly since December last year, because it was just about the start of my last year at university. And I've been catechizing for about the same amount of time. I went to church basically to talk to the priest about looking into official catechism. But yeah, I'm not an official Catholic yet either. Obviously, I'm not going to declare immediately that I'm fit to be a Catholic or I'm destined to be a Catholic. But right now, it's the faith that makes the most sense to me, and I don't really see that changing. For context,
Yeah,
for anyone who doesn't know, watching the podcast, the NDP is a party that bases itself primarily upon Catholic social and economic teaching. So there might be some people out there who do know that, somewhat scoffing at the blatant hypocrisy. But no, neither of us are official Catholics. But the NDP isn't a distinctly or exclusively Catholic party. Distributism isn't exclusively religious in nature. You wanted to say something about that, didn't you, Sam?
yeah, I'd say the majority of people within our party are completely catechized Catholics, confirmed in communion, regular communion takers as well at Mass. It just so happens that myself and Fraser today are two of the minority of people who aren't actually confirmed Catholics. But that's the beauty of Catholic principles. I think, for example, something like distributism can be reached through philosophical means rather than purely based on theology. And that's a testament to the fact that we have atheists and other secularists in the party. So, for example, I wrote a very quick premise conclusion philosophical outlook for distributism. So, premise one, the state exists to serve the needs of the community. I think we can all agree on that premise. Premise two, a state which does more positives for a community with the same resources is a better state than one which does less for the community with the same resources. Conclusion one, therefore, efficiency within the state is desirable. Premise three, concentrations of power result in bureaucracy or monopolies. Premise four, bureaucracies and monopolies are inherently inefficient. Conclusion two, therefore, concentrations of power are inherently worse than systems of decentralized power. Conclusion three, therefore, the principle of subsidiarity, which is a distributist principle, is inherently good.
Yeah, I follow along pretty closely with all of that. What is your justification for premise four? The bureaucracies and monopolies are inherently inefficient.
So I think we have to address them separately. So first of all, monopolies are inefficient because when you have a lack of competition, if we look at, for example, in the British economic climate right now, there is, for example, on the railway, because there's no availability of competition, the prices have gone sky high. It means that we're paying more for the same service. And if we look at, on the opposite, about bureaucracy, government inefficiency, so we're looking at Doge in America, for example, they managed to save, was it like 10 billion they managed to save in the first month alone just by cutting bureaucratic inefficiencies? I think these ones are probably less so a priori immediate truths to be known, but they're things that we can experience and know them to be relative truths.
Yeah, the practical truth of them, at least in recent times, is that
Yeah, there's
yeah,
nothing
they're
inherently
inefficient.
with a monopoly. Yeah, there's nothing inherently within a monopoly to say that it has to be inefficient. So, for example, you can logically conceive of a monopoly
Is
delivers the best
efficient.
quality. Exactly, it is completely efficient. But the problem is, there's no reason to in a capitalist system, because capitalism is about getting the most amount of extracted money from labor. There is no reason to have efficiency for the benefit of the consumer rather than for the benefit of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
monopoly owner.
If you consider efficiency to be like the greatest utility provided to consumers, then yeah, I agree. Inherently inefficient, just because there's no competition, there's no danger to that company in their operation, and they can test the boundaries of wealth extraction as much as they want. Yeah, I completely agree there.
Absolutely, yeah. So that was just a very short conclusion I thought I'd draw up just to show that you don't actually have to necessarily be a Catholic to come to distributist principles. But let's move on to Rerum Novarum, shall we?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking that you basically, yeah, lifted a lot of that from Rerum Novarum. It goes into way greater detail in really some really good, well, some really insightful stuff, considering it was written, what, 130 years ago now, that still
Yeah,
applies today.
I know you want to talk about later as well the kind of prophetic nature of some parts of the document and its application to the modern day.
Oh, yeah, definitely. That'll come out as we talk through it. It doesn't particularly follow a set structure, it kind of just goes through generally, unless you identified a structure in the writing.
I can kind of see two aspects. Well,
Oh,
we'll call
yeah.
it two overarching aspects that we
Yeah.
spoke about before we started
Mm.
recording. We have the economic issues and the social issues, both of which are being addressed. And then
Mm.
within the economic issues, it's broken down into critiques of capitalism and critiques of socialism. It's a lot of a looser structure. It kind of
Yeah.
flows in and out of these different topics.
There's like two big themes, I'd say. Less structure. He kind of weaves in and out of them. Pope Leo, he dips into economic side. He'll justify himself with theology, and then he'll dip into the other aspect that I identified. Sam identified economics. I've called it on progress this section, but it's mostly just to do with society and culture
So
and
social issues.
yeah, social issues. The ways that I thought the document was, as you said, prophetic. I would definitely use that word actually. Was prophetic in regards to modern issues.
I think, as we're saying, it's very relevant in the modern day, and yet there still seems to be a space or a gap that needs to be filled. That many people are suggesting that perhaps the modern Pope Leo he might draw a second version of Rerum Novarum, addressing specifically the conditions of workers in regard to AI, the kind of way that we're moving with technology.
Yeah, I actually think he's not written a new one yet. He's only been around for a couple of months. But yeah, that
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
big
yeah.
thing. I just looked it up to check. He mentioned Rerum Novarum in his opening address in his first mass, Pope Leo XIV. He's definitely on board with the distributist ideology. He picked the name Pope Leo only because of the original Pope Leo, the previous Pope Leo, and that was primarily because he'd written Rerum Novarum. So yeah,
Absolutely.
I think we're
Yeah.
definitely going to see a continuity from the two Leos reflected today. We're probably going to see more the kind of stuff that Rerum Novarum talks about coming out in any modern encyclicals or modern discussions.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, let's try and get into the meat of what Rerum Novarum actually talks about. The first part
Yeah.
is he introduces the document by discussing basically the context in which he's written it, all about revolutionary change.
Yeah.
Because the late 1800s, even though you've gotten over the hump of the French Revolution and of revolutions across Germany, Austria, Italy, basically everywhere in Europe in 1848, even though you're past these by the time he writes it in 1891, there's still a lot of discontent and there's still a lot of hardship among working class people, which is one of the things that we see today. One of the main parallels that I draw between the times then and the times now. The people of Europe were suffering because we'd reached the latest stage of industrialization.
Absolutely. The quote that stands out to me in the first section that he's discussing is, "We thought it expedient now to speak on the condition of the working classes." So it seems to me that the church has taken note of the condition of society, and they've seen that the struggle and strife affecting the working classes. We've moved towards a more industrialized society, and they've taken note of how the working class has been left behind, and you've got a growing separation of economic wealth. And why I think this is actually quite interesting, and as I mentioned a minute ago about how there's the potential for another continuation of this kind of document for the modern day, is again we are starting to see a massive wealth gap between the ultra rich and then the working classes in society. We're
Yeah.
seeing the middle classes kind of dissolve. The middle classes and the working classes are kind of being amalgamated into one kind of group when you compare it to the wealth of the ultra wealthy. And there really does not exist so much a class system in terms of wealth anymore. We're really starting to see a upper end of working class, lower end of working class, and then a massive gap to the ultra wealthy in terms of if we're placing people on kind of a graph. That's the two parallels I draw from the document to the modern day.
Yeah, I mean, upper end and lower end of the middle class, I'd call it people who are like drowning and then the people who are just managing to get by. The middle class has been completely just nuked in the last 5 years. COVID really put the last nails in the coffin there, because I remember seeing a lot of articles around about the time that COVID was ending saying that, I guess you'd call them capitalists, the upper end of society, the ultra wealthy, had managed to squeeze 3.8 trillion, I believe it was. It was definitely 3 point something, 3.8 trillion out of workers in gross value, in pure wealth. They'd managed to exploit the pandemic essentially to further consolidate their riches. 3.8 trillion is not an inconsiderable amount of money, considering that I think the global economic system adds up to about 60 trillion, 70 trillion. That's the GDP of the world.
There is a statistic I saw a while ago. I'm going to have a look if I can find it right now. And I think it was that the private equity group BlackRock, they have a total asset worth of, I think it's somewhere around 10 trillion. And I think it was more than the GDP of 195 countries, the bottom 195 countries combined.
So everything except China and the US, yeah.
Well, everything except, well, I think depending on who you ask, there's somewhere between like 197 to 207 countries. So almost every country in the world's GDP combined is still below one single company's $10 trillion worth of assets.
Yeah, I just checked, by the way. Slightly undershot it. The global GDP is about 110 trillion, but still
110 trillion.
3.8 trillion in the grand scheme of that is about 3 to 4%. Suddenly, and only over the course of 1 year, centralized into the hands of a small number of people. That's why it just cannot be healthy. And we see that it isn't healthy. A priori, it's not unhealthy, but we see the results of it in the world today. And yeah, it's frankly sickening.
We also see a massive change between the wealthy of the past and the wealthy of today. So in the past, people who were extraordinarily wealthy, they were often, in some regards, still, whether due to personal belief or they wanted to be seen positively by the local community, they were still giving a tithe to the church. They would often be building castles, they'd be building churches and all this kind of stuff, which actually benefits society, making donations to the local community, even if that is just to carry on their own power. Whereas in the modern day, we're actually seeing the opposite. We're seeing the ultra wealthy removing their money from society through offshore banking and trying to pay as little tax as possible. And actually, they're not contributing to society in any meaningful way. Because of globalization, they can exist in a vacuum outside the rest of us. So they don't actually need our approval in any way for them to continue living the way they do.
Well, yeah, it's basically a global aristocracy
Absolutely.
because they've managed to detach themselves from the rest of society, and especially from any sort of geographical constraint, because most countries don't really have laws against you owning assets in them, even if you don't hold that country's nationality. Because of that, these ultra rich of the modern world are able to essentially operate their vast industries and rule over their vast wealth from anywhere in the world. If one country was to try and prosecute them for perceived injustices, they'd just simply be able to flee it. And then, yeah, as you rightly said, in the past, they couldn't do that because if they were unpopular enough, they'd get their heads chopped off. Revolution was a serious concern.
Well, absolutely. And it's funny you're talking about international wealth in that way. You're completely correct. I saw something the other day about how Dubai owns more of London than the King does.
Yeah. Why do Arab Emirates own more of our capital city than we do? Than the King does?
And it's not going to be for our personal benefit.
Well, no, because again, no laws mandate them to produce wealth and then maintain it and keep it within the country. It's obviously just extraction. It's extraction. Very similar to the way we extracted wealth from the colony during the period of our empire.
And
the
yet,
wheel has
still,
just turned.
with the colonies, the wealth we extracted, it is true that it was absolutely a net positive for what we'd call the mothership for Great Britain. and yet we still contributed back to society what we built in the sewer systems we put down, in terms of the roads, the infrastructure we put in place. So somewhere like Australia would not be the country it is today without the British Empire. That's not to say we didn't extract immense wealth from Australia. Absolutely we did, but we still gave something back in return. Whether it was an unequal bargain, that's that's completely up for debate, but there was some kind of trade. Whereas I don't really see what we gain back, what benefit we can harvest from Dubai, a single country, owning more of our capital city than even our own king.
Well, we get delicious food, don't we? Sit down and enjoy your kebabs, Sam, you bigot. No, seriously though.
Stop protesting and go have a kebab.
Yeah, basically, you flag shagger. Just enjoy your kebabs. Did you know that St. George isn't English? He was actually Palestinian.
Whoa.
He was Palestinian.
Whoa. You're telling me that Christian who was born in at the time Greece, he's a Palestinian Muslim? What?
Yeah, he was born in Cappadocia, which is like a geographical term that probably most people discovered a week ago.
Yeah.
Because
Wait,
they
is
just
that not modern day Turkey? Is that not modern day Turkey?
Guys, Cappadocia, modern day Turkey. I'm so enlightened because it just took me a Google search to find that out. Yeah. No,
it's like saying that somebody in Australia today would have been an indigenous. They're an indigenous Australian because 1,000 years ago it would have been indigenous Australians there. It makes no difference what it is today. Just because it's modern day Turkey today doesn't mean 1,000 years ago St. George was a Turk.
Yeah, I mean the thing about St. George, that is fertile ground for another episode. All the stuff about identity and whether you can authentically found your own identity off of someone who wasn't part of that identity, like the way English people, we claim St. George. That's a whole episode, but I think it's pretty infuriating talking about all that.
Yeah, we'll move on from that part of the discussion. We'll just end by saying all Turks are just Greeks.
I'm gonna have to counterbalance that by saying all Greeks are just Turks. We can't, yeah.
And we're both arguing about it from our apartments in Berlin, so
real. Okay, yeah, that is very real. But no, yeah. To very briefly sum up my own thoughts on the matter. No matter what you think of the British Empire, there was some onus on the British to administer the territories that they extracted wealth from. People who today own vast swaths of land in our country, or swaths, however you say it, they are not nominally our governors or our colonial administrators, and they feel no duty and are not expected to reinvest that money into us in any way. So the new form of colonialism is almost more insidious and less beneficial to the colonized than any European colonialism ever was.
Absolutely. It's even more wealth extracting than it was back in those days, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And there's also there's less of an available remedy, because back then, if the colonists, for example, in America felt they were being taxed too hard, what do? They revolt. They know how, they know who, and what to do. How can we revolt against people owning our land if the people owning our land and benefiting from the system are actually not even present within this country? And yet the people who'd be administering the support for them owning our land would be the police of our state. It really is it's a circular problem.
How do you resist a force that you don't even know? Because many of the most rich people in the world don't publicize their wealth or their connections.
Yeah.
And certainly BlackRock is a name that remains unknown to basically anyone who isn't politically minded or interested in modern economics. It's a completely novel term. But then, that's the point of discussing these things. That's the point of having political debate and trying to listen to as many things as possible.
What's interesting is what I see from Rerum Novarum. Another quote I've picked up here is that it says, "Some opportune remedy must be found quickly for the misery and wretchedness pressing so unjustly on the majority of the working class. For the ancient working men's guilds were abolished in the last century, and no other protective organisation took their place. What we would say in the modern day is that what has taken the places of the guilds, supposedly, would be the unions. But we know that unions in the modern day are completely insufficient to protect the rights of the working classes.
Yeah, they seem fairly ineffectual.
Whereas the guilds were focused specifically on their craft and their trade, and many of them would have been run with Christian ideals in mind. We see with the modern unions, They're more focused on political virtue signalling than actually securing the fruits of the labour for the workers.
That paragraph 3, for anyone who is interested in Rerum Novarum and the specific parts that we're talking about, that paragraph 3 actually ends with a quote that is important to what we're talking about right now and important to what we just discussed about neocolonialism. It ends with, a small number of very rich men have been able to lay upon the teeming masses of the labouring poor a yoke little better than that of slavery itself.
Absolutely.
The issue fundamentally of the modern world is not an issue of, oh, we haven't got guilds, everything's awful, it's over. The issue is fundamentally that power has been concentrated. The methods of attaining wealth have become so sophisticated and are now being used by an increasingly select group of individuals, to the extent that we are emerging back into what another distributist, Belloc, described as the servile state, a political state of being in which, whether out of convenience or out of submission, we are all effectively slaves. All of us who are not ultra wealthy are effectively just slaves, without agency, without any real hope of upward economic or social advancement, just stuck where we are. And if we suffer, then the suffering is completely justified, not morally, but socially.
It's not to be confused, though, with communist ideas that private property needs to be abolished. Rerum Novarum and the church has been extraordinarily clear. Private property is a divine right to people. We have a divine right to have access to the fruits of our labour. So if we are to grow, for example, our own food, it is our right to own that food and not have it stolen by the state. But at the same time, the quote from Matthew 19:24 in the Bible states, "Again I tell you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." And this is not to say that wealthy people are all destined to go to hell, but it's a very clear emphasis on Christian teachings that being wealthy in this life is not purely about having physical wealth. What real wealth is a spiritual wealth. It's a wealth that brings goodness to the community. And yet, those who hoard wealth to the detriment of society, they're going against the Christian life. And as Fraser mentioned earlier, and as something my priest often says, is that we're supposed to live a sacramental lifestyle as Christians, a continual process of striving to be better, striving to live Christ-like. And yet, if we're hoarding wealth like BlackRock to the detriment of society, if we're just trying to buy as many assets as possible so we can raise rents on single mothers and people living in the cities, I don't think that is a Christian teaching. And many people who are Christian, especially in America, for example, they might hear our podcast and think, really? All the conservatives in America who are Christian, they've all told me that capitalism is the best thing. We need to make a very clear distinction between capitalism meaning purely the right to private property and free enterprise, and then conservative capitalism in the sense of somebody, for example, like Ayn Rand or Robert Nozick. Ayn Rand, for example, talks about atomism. The idea of atomism is that we are all simply individual atoms and we bounce around off each other a little bit, but mainly the only person in the world you should look after is yourself. She calls it ethical self-interest or super egoism, which is just another way of saying be extremely greedy, care about nobody else, and the only people you should care about a little bit are those other atoms you might collide with, purely because if you collide with them, you might bond with them for your own benefit. So when we look at these two differing ideas of capitalism, we have capitalism on the one hand of free enterprise, free ownership of property, which the church has no problem with. And then you have complete individualism, which again, we all know is, from that quote we've just given, is completely ungodly.
I was going to bring up a quote, but then you got rolling. There's a paragraph in Rerum Novarum 28 which explicitly attacks the greed of possession and the thirst for pleasure, those being twin plagues which too often make a man who is void of self-restraint miserable in the midst of abundance. Which I think is a pretty nice way to put that you can be as rich as you want, but it doesn't necessarily make you happy. You deprive others through enriching yourself, which certainly ensures they are more miserable, but doesn't necessarily ensure that you are more happy.
Absolutely.
To chase after like infinite wealth is, well, essentially to subject yourself to wealth. It's to make it your god, to make it your object of worship. When that's all you care about is the bottom line, you're no better than than someone who, I don't know, worships pleasure or worships their own image or worships God, I guess. But at least when you have the worship of God, it's not a devotion to a materialistic aspect, nor a devotion to yourself. It's a devotion to others. It's devotion to a higher ideal.
Absolutely. But the problem for many people, especially in the American world, hearing this, if they've come from
Yeah,
an extremely capitalist mindset,
is to
is they're
think that
getting
it's communism or socialism.
exactly, yeah, because they kind of get their ideas about capitalism from somebody like Robert Nozick. So Robert Nozick, he's very famous for saying taxation is theft, but more specifically his quote of saying paying tax is akin to slavery. The modern day political discourse in America, for example, many people do actually believe that any kind of taxation is some kind of slavery. We would completely say that for the betterment of society, there has to be the existence of some kind of state. But within distributist thinking, we have obviously the idea of subsidiarity, the idea that the minimal unit should be that which produces, rather than a large bureaucratic state such as socialism or a decentralized network of monopolies under capitalism.
Yeah, I've always felt that the purpose of a state, first and foremost, is basically to permit the people who are under it, who submit themselves to its authority, to just get on with their lives as they wish to. Essentially, I'm quite a fan of the social contract idea of states and
Liberal.
and their constituents. That relationship, I'm a big fan of that. But yeah,
I quite like
it's
Thomas Hobbes.
yeah, well, yeah. Hobbes is like the first social contract guy, at least in my opinion.
Yeah,
He's not the
yeah,
first
yeah,
one to
yeah.
use that word. That comes out with Rousseau and the late early 1800s. But Hobbes is basically the guy who describes the social contract. In all but name, he describes it because he talks about, well, the Leviathan that he mentions is the Leviathan of the state.
Yes.
It's the authority that we submit to and have over us that makes us safer and prevents us basically from getting murdered for what we
I think
believe or for other people's
conservatives.
gain.
I think conservatives have abandoned some of their most prolific and I think probably correct or important conservative people, such as Edmund Burke, who is often seen as the founding father of conservatism.
Mm,
And he argued for the importance of religious institutions for the moral stability and good of the state. That's from his reflections on the revolution in France. And I think on the modern day, many people again, we're talking about America a lot because they seem to be the moral center of the world. Conservatives will argue for separation of church and state. The problem is when the church and state are wholly separate, you have an economic policy which is able to be immoral, and you have a religious institution which does not have the power to influence society. And that's why someone like Edmund Burke, I think he's got a really good way of suggesting how the state can still be above the church in many ways in terms of running society, and yet the state be more empowered to influence society and make it more moral.
yeah, saying something like the church and the state should be wholly separate is, well, to put it professionally, it's hypocritical and paradoxical. To put it plainly, it's just fucking stupid. Because oh, I didn't swear then. The church's chief mission is to guide people away from their perceived state of sin. The Catholic Church, the Christian Church, this is their main end, to guide people away from a perceived state of sin towards an idealistic state of virtue and enlightenment. The state, their goal is essentially to permit people to live as they wish and permit them to thrive. Rerum Novarum adds the proviso that the state's primary objective should be to inculcate mass virtue among its people. Now, of course, you can disagree on that because what does that mean? Inculcating mass virtue? Does that mean education? Does it mean indoctrination? Whatever. But the idea that the church should be trying to educate people on how they should live in terms of morals and ethics, but should try not to influence laws in any way, and conversely, the government, which is trying to get people to live well, shouldn't be affected by religious ethics or morals in any way. It's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. If someone gets into government who is religious, they cannot divorce their religiosity from their understanding of what it means to live well and to live righteously. So to separate the church and state is impossible. And so, yeah, people who call for the continued separation of church and state, first of all, what is it? How have you separated it in the first place? And second of all, how would you continue to separate it when there are religious people in government?
I might also add as well that the idea of separation of church and state is a very Protestant outlook on society. I was baptized in a Baptist church, as I said, so technically I am a Protestant for now until I'm catechized. But I think the idea that, as you mentioned, we can remove godliness from governance, I think it's completely contradictory, because what is good governance without godliness?
Well, yeah, what do you use to inform how you govern people, if not your ethics? And where do you get your ethics from?
Exactly, especially when it comes to the economic side as well. Because just looking at this here, another quote from Rerum Novarum says that working men have been surrendered, isolated, and helpless to the hard-heartedness of employers and the greed of unchecked competition. And secondly, another quote says, the mischief has been increased by the rapacious usury, which, although more than once condemned by the church, is nevertheless under a different guise, but with like injustice, still practiced by covetous and grasping men. We can all conceive of the kind of people who are in these positions of power, and they're the people who are really honing in this message of, oh no, you should separate morality from the economy. The reason they want you to do that is so they can continue exploiting your labor, and well, that's it, just to profit for themselves.
The Catholic Church has really been on the ground floor of like anti-usury efforts. The entire push to like detach morality from existence and to tell people or to convince people that there's no such thing as objective morality, good and evil, there's no such thing as right and wrong, and anything is justifiable so long as you can make some argument for it. Yeah, that's just it's an atheist, perhaps even Satanist push to open up the doors to all sorts of absolutely indefensible behavior. Why else would you try to eliminate morals, or at least, unchanging morals from society, unless you benefited by their absence?
Ask yourselves why they want these degenerate practices to be allowed. When it comes to usury, it's because they want to profit.
They
When it
want
comes
to
to
use it.
pornography,
Exactly.
exactly. Yeah,
They want to use
pornography.
it.
They want to use. They want to profit from it as well.
Yeah, they want to make money
It
off
comes
pornography.
to brothels. They don't want to be in them. They want to be using them to
To make
make
money.
money.
Exactly.
It all comes down to linking degeneracy with this atheistic idea that money is the root of all happiness.
With atheism, I'm firmly convinced that everyone worships something and believes in something. You have to have
Yeah.
something at the center of your worldview. If you're an atheist who doesn't believe in religion, what are you believing in? And I think for many people nowadays, that is money.
See, whereas we're different. As Catholics, we believe what at the center of our universe is clearly the Earth. We reject heliocentrism. Galileo, be gone.
Let's not start on Galileo. Otherwise,
I'm
I'm going to have to bring up
I'm
how
joking.
Galileo was not killed by the Catholic Church.
I'm only joking.
We'll have to start on that whole trope. Oh, that always gets to me. I need to not have a tangent about it.
Let's move on.
I need to not have a tangent about that.
We've done
Yeah.
critiques of capitalism.
We talked a bit
Let's
about it.
talk about.
I was just going to check if there was anything else I wanted to bring up about the economics of Rerum Novarum. There was a quote that I wanted
There's
to
communism.
use.
There's some more critiques we can use of communism. Yeah.
I was going to quickly say that there was a quote that was pretty pertinent to what you said before about private ownership, private property. Man precedes the state and possesses, prior to the formation of any state, the right of providing for the substance of his body. In essence,
Absolutely.
In essence, what you need to survive, you are entitled to own. So in this case, land, tools, food, things like this. Also, if we're really going down the path of preemptively combating a American conservative response, it's in favor of small government. It's a document and an argument that is inherently in favor of the government intervening as little as possible in people's lives. At least
Yeah.
in terms of legislation, not trying to put people on rails with how they live. It's more of a guiding body that is ready to step in when people stray or people are threatened with violence. That's what the purpose of the government is, to basically protect people, but otherwise not to decide how they live.
We have to be very clear that this was written less so for the support of the modern day Americanized small state ideal of the country only being there for defense of the nation, and that's really it. This was more so in response to socialism, which has an all overbearing society. The state oversees literally everything. So yeah, that's what I'd say about that.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't even written by an American. This was written
No,
by
no,
Pope
true.
Leo was Italian, and
Yeah.
presumably when he wrote this, he was living in the Vatican. So yeah,
There are some
this
interesting
is very
crossovers
European.
between the Marxists and Rerum Novarum that I've picked up when they're referring to critiques of capitalism.
Yeah,
So, for example, when discussing revolution, the chief one that we have in mind is the French Revolution. Obviously, the French Revolution was ungodly, but many people might mistakenly believe that communists and Marxists alike supported the French Revolution. If you read Marx's writings, specifically, he talks about how the French Revolution was how the capitalists forced the working class to kill off the nobility to make themselves the slaves to the new ruling class empire of the capitalists, which I just thought was really, really interesting. He
yeah,
says that
I've
replacing
seen that
the
argument.
conflict between yeah, he says replacing the conflict between aristocracy and bourgeoisie is now the conflict between the bourgeoisie class and the proletarian class, as ruled by the bourgeoisie leads to intensified exploitation of the latter by the former. That's not to say that we agree that communism is correct and Marxism is correct, but they do have some truth in the fact that the French Revolution saw the nobility and often the ruling class who had some allegiance to the church and some semblance of godliness being completely replaced by this godless capitalist class.
Yeah, no, I mean, you see it in other revolutions as well. In the French Revolution, obviously, the first two groups to go are the first and second estates, the nobility
Yes.
and the royalty, and then the clergy. The church and the aristocrats get basically wiped out by the French Revolution to be replaced by the likes of people like, Robespierre and Danton. These are lawyers, these are middle class professions, doctors, scholars, lawyers, yes, I just said. These are like the prime bourgeoisie that Marx talks about as being, well, I guess dangerous, as being the new exploitative ruling class of the world. So I definitely see it in relation to the French Revolution. And I would also raise it's true for the Russian Revolution as well, because
Yes.
the first people to go in the Russian Revolution are the Orthodox Church and the royalty and the nobility, the Romanovs, and all of the people who basically tacked onto them. All of those are the first to go. They're quickly
I think
replaced.
an even better and more clear example would be the Spanish Civil War. The atrocities committed against the church, just for
Yeah.
example, was absolutely horrific. And it just goes to show that what we'd call traditional nobility, the overseers of society, they were the ones that tied the church into that group. Because obviously at the time, the church was instrumental in providing orphanages, running the education systems, as well as being the spiritual and moral center of society. Their role in that seemingly ruling part of Spain, the Marxists or the communists, again, just because we can agree with them on the criticisms of capitalism does not mean we support them, because it was they who perpetrated this disgusting genocide against the church in Spain during the Civil War.
Yeah, the Red Terror, the most extreme
Yes.
of the Republicans, mostly the communists. I believe the anarchists may have taken some part as well,
Yes.
but it is a very complex conflict, the Spanish Civil War, and it's annoying just because in some ways I sympathise with both sides, but they are
Mm.
very much let down by specific elements who just overstep the boundaries. For example, on the left wing side, on the Republican side, the communists and the anarchists, and on the right wing side, on Franco's side, it's whoever had the idea to bring like tens of thousands of African Moors into the country and use them as a bludgeoning and a raping tool against,
Yeah.
resisting Republican communities. And also whoever greenlit an alliance with the Nazis and the fascists. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's also like fertile ground for a political discussion. The Spanish Civil War. It's
The
just a
problem is
tragedy.
anytime there's war, there's moral, not ambiguity, but there's going to be moral clashes. Anytime that there's war, you often see on both sides moral problems, which is why avoiding conflict entirely is the preferred option. And in Rerum Novarum, very specifically, it says, "It is no easy matter to define the relative rights and mutual duties of the rich and of the poor, of capital and of labour, and the danger lies in this, that crafty agitators are intent on making use of these differences of opinion to pervert man's judgments and to stir up the people to revolt. And what's explicitly being said here is that some people are using this kind of the class consciousness of the Marxists and the criticisms of socialism of the nobility, and they're actually pitting them against each other, hoping for conflict so that they can benefit, creating moral issues on both sides in revolt and revolution.
It's talked about later on, isn't it? About the agitation
Yes.
of the working class being a tool rather than something that is natural.
Respect is an autonomous, yeah.
Yeah. It's ultimately our anger. It's just as true today, especially true today with the massive media engines that we are essentially subject to at all times. Our anger serves a purpose for these people. You know, to be directionless with our anger and our hatred is to play right into the hands of people who would happily run us in circles for decades while they ultimately consolidate their power and render us completely incapable of a revolution if one were necessary. It's important to know, or at least try to know, the true lay of the land in regards to right and wrong, truth, reality, and to try and direct anger and hate, because I do think that anger and hate serve a purpose, to try and direct those emotions and those feelings in a proper way, in a productive way.
Some people are of the opinion that hate of any kind is ungodly, but I would ask them, is it ungodly to hate sin? It's ungodly to hate sinners, but is it ungodly to hate sin and to flee from it with both legs? I would argue absolutely hating
Just the
sin,
one leg.
just the one leg, yeah.
Is
Hating
hate.
sin is actually a moral virtue.
Well, yeah, I think that for me at least, it's the classic polar argument of, to have love, you've got to have an opposite. You've got to have hate. To have right, you've got to have left. To have up, you've got to have down. Because hate and love are, in some ways, relative terms to describe affection or relatively strong affection towards something and relatively low affection or a relatively low opinion of something. Yeah, if you want to fully and truthfully love with your whole being, then you have to know how to fully and truthfully hate with your whole being.
And it's about channeling those to the right godly things.
Yeah.
Because if you were to hate nature, for example, well, you're hating a part of God's design. But if you're hating moral evil, well, then in one sense, hating moral evil is actually worshipping the Creator because you're acting in accordance with His desires to live a godly life.
Yeah, yeah, and even to take it one step back and discuss purely secular matters for our audience who might not be, religious. Is it wrong to hate injustice, to hate that people suffer in the world? I don't think so.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Thanks.
So with that being
I
with that
know.
being said, I think we move on to. I think that's quite a good segment to move on to the social aspects of Rerum Novarum, considering we're
Mhm.
already talking about objective morality in a sense.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time on it. So the social aspects of Rerum Novarum. I mean, we've started to talk about it a bit already, but later on in the document, from about section 20 onwards to about section 40, I feel that his discussion of the social aspects is the priority. That's the forefront. He talks a lot about what the state. This is why I lifted the things about the state being placed to achieve mass virtue. That's where this came from. He talks a lot about what the state's function is, what the state's function should be, essentially. He talks about it here, yes. Paragraph 32, he quotes, "Now, a state chiefly prospers and thrives through moral rule, well-regulated family life, respect for religion and justice, the moderation and fair imposition of public taxation, the progress of the arts and of trade, and the abundant yield of the land, everything through, in fact, which makes the citizens better and happier." I think it's interesting that a church document is making basically declarative statements about politics. That's what I see this as, and about society.
What I quite like about this is that there is opposing philosophical views. For example, deontologicalism and why can't I think of what the other one's called?
Ontologicalism.
No, no, no. I was
No,
thinking
no,
of the
that's another
one
one,
where
isn't
it's like,
it?
which is just make everybody happy.
Oh,
What's the
utilitarianism.
utilitarianism? I couldn't think of what it was called. By G. Moore
Yeah.
and Jeremy Bentham. Matt, please edit that out. So there are two polar opposites. You've got deontology and utilitarianism. And what I think was really interesting about this statement here is that it talks about both the good of people generally, achieving the good of people generally, but it also has specific ends attached to that. So the good is not simply something that somebody feels, but it's something that's done through other things. So such as that being through art, being it through prosperity, through relief and remedy, the common good, citizens being better and happier. I think that's really interesting that religion and justice are put in the same kind of categories as these other traits that we may experience in life, because we're seeing that there are different ways to receive God's grace of goodness. And what that draws parallels to me about is how through the sacraments we draw grace. So even though grace is something that exists at all times and Christ's sacrifice exists at all times, we can specifically partake through grace through the sacraments. So that's how I kind of read this part of the document.
This section fascinated me because I was comparing it as soon as I read it to the modern state of things. I was thinking about, if a state needs to be doing these things to thrive and to prosper, how many of them are we doing? And, well, is our state thriving or prospering? I think the answer to that is fairly straightforward. No. How many of these things are we
No.
doing? Is there some truth to that? Thanks, by the way. Fucking hell, villain voice. Yeah, how much of this then is actually verifiable? How much is actually compelling? If we go through the list and talk about it, I think it's fair to say that most of them are absent nowadays. Moral rule, that is probably the one that I think that is the most obviously not present nowadays, right?
Rampant degeneracy,
Yeah.
disrespect for the sacraments such as marriage, disrespect for the lives of the unborn and those near the end of their life through euthanasia and abortion. I mean, just moral degeneracy on every single level.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I agree. Oh, you got ahead of me actually. I was going to talk about moral rule just from the government, but you can see it. Yeah, throughout society, there is a distinct lack of morality when it comes to people prioritizing perhaps convenience or comfort or peace over confronting what is degenerate or immoral and trying to stamp it out. So yeah, things like the assisted dying bill, euthanasia, where we
Yeah.
are basically giving up certain people's lives for what? To save a bit of money? To
Well, I've got an anecdotal piece of evidence here, actually. I
yeah.
saw on the news, this must have been about a year ago. In Canada, there was a gentleman who had been in the army, and he
Oh
was
yes,
suffering with
I've heard
he
of
was
this.
suffering
Yeah.
with PTSD. Yeah, so many of you might already be aware of this. That they claim that they've taken steps to address this. The moral horror still lives on. So he had PTSD, and he went to see the doctor. And I believe in Canada you had to have support of the doctor and a psychiatrist to have euthanasia. And instead of offering him the therapy he needed and the mental health pills required, it was cheaper for them to offer him euthanasia, and the doctor and the therapist signed it off without really examining him. So a soldier, a veteran in Canada was killed off purely to save the state money. And I think playing God in that kind of way with people's lives is absolutely morally abhorrent.
I find it incredibly morbid that there is basically any situation in which you would speed someone's death along. I can get it if someone's like, well, I can understand it, but it still makes me feel a bit uneasy. If someone was in a lot of pain and
Terminally ill.
essentially determined to die anyway, I can somewhat understand it there. But in
I
cases
can
like this,
understand.
where
I
people
can understand the removal of
they give away their
support.
lives, it's just
Yeah,
yeah,
I think there's a difference between removing support. So, for example, if somebody's on life support, but then they make it very clear they want the life support turned off, you're
mm,
not killing that person directly. You're letting the natural functions flow. You're
yeah,
letting what's nature take its course. That's very different from giving somebody pills to take to prematurely end their life, in my
yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Yes, euthanasia for for individuals like, well, as you said, this veteran scarred by his service to his country, offering that to him is just incredible. It is the most
in the negative sense. In the negative sense, to be clear.
yeah. Oh no, yeah. We should be giving everyone euthanasia. It's incredible in the sense of the word. It's difficult to understand. It is
It's beyond belief, isn't
so.
it?
Yes, it's incredible in the sense that it is beyond belief that that individuals can ever be so heartless or so callous as to remedy an absence of life in someone with less life.
Yeah.
It's just it's awful.
Well, I
Yeah.
think we can't withdraw the social morality from economic morality. And the reason why I mention this is because I've had a lot of interaction with socialists who talk about the declining state of the world and how the wealth gap is growing and all this kind of these kind of economic issues. And I ask them, if you look at the correlation between the decline in morality in terms of adherence to the Christian faith in the UK, and you look at the growing wealth gap, you can see a very clear correlation. So, for example, the abolition of the usury laws in England, which I believe I think it banned any usury above 5% a year. What we've seen from that is a massive increase in banking, and we've seen all these kind of trading firms and manipulating stock markets and buying small companies and trade loans and all these kind of things where the banks collapse and the public has to bail them out. And you ask them, well, do you see how this has been a negative for society, removing the moral aspect of the economy? And they just look at you and say no, because Karl Marx told us that religion is the opioid of the masses. So even when the data is extremely clear that we need moral frameworks, even for economies to function, they're happy to cling on to the atheistic worldview because great leader Karl Marx says so.
Yeah, I mean the worshipping of Karl Marx is also incredible in the beyond belief sense, because this was a guy who was destitute his entire life and begged for money constantly
Off his
from
friend who was
his
an
best friend
insanely
Friedrich
rich
Engels.
guy.
Yeah, he consistently begged money off of him, even when Friedrich Engels was asking him to emotionally support him through the death of his sister. For context,
Yeah.
Friedrich Engels' sister, Marx was punctuating letters by asking for money. Also, all the people who purportedly love Karl Marx open up his private correspondence. This man was an incredible racist, and I mean that in the beyond belief sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
This guy utilized slurs to an extreme extent.
Unless they're giving him money, if anybody's giving him money, he is absolutely on his knees for them.
Exactly. If you give Karl Marx money, you're awesome. If you deny him money, unfortunately, you are a bourgeoisie capitalist and an
And that is actually
unspeakable
the state
word.
of modern social. That's the state of modern socialism, though, isn't it? It's always about moral virtue signaling how you want to spend other people's money, and never your own.
Yeah, without segueing too much into like a discussion of modern politics. Yeah, I think there's a big emphasis nowadays on virtue signaling, which is bad because virtue should be authentic, it should be sincere. Again, if you abdicate God from his throne, there's no one to
Yeah,
hold you to account when you're insincere about virtue. That's another
absolutely.
reason why, even if perhaps a slightly insincere reason, or perhaps a reason that people might go, wait a minute, you don't actually believe. Another reason to have religion is because if people actually genuinely believe there is a God holding them to account for their lies and their actions, then maybe they won't go around pretending to be a good person, but will rather strive to be a good person. They'll actually become a good person.
But actually, Fraser, if you need to have a god watching you so you be moral, are you actually moral at all? It doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter because even if that's your only reason for doing it, having a more moral basis in the world is objectively better than not. So even if people are doing it for a bad reason, even if people are only being moral because they think somebody's watching them, and let's say, for example, hypothetically, there was no god, even if they thought there was and they were doing it for that sole reason, that's still a benefit to society that they're being or trying to be a more moral person than if they weren't. So it's not really a gotcha moment. That
Anyone whose first reaction to that line of reasoning is what you said. Just look up the state of Singapore. Do some research into the state of Singapore and their approach to crime in the last 70 years, and you'll see why it is better to have an elusive panopticon watching you than nothing at all.
Well, also, you've got the whole people saying, I don't need religion to be a moral person. Yeah, that's because you've grown up in a Christian moral framework where murder is bad. And you know murder is bad, not purely because you've come to it from your own rational intuition, because, 2,000 years ago, most of Europe, for example, would have been pagan, and murder was not seen so much in the same way, especially with regards to infanticide. So just because you've grown up with a Christian moral framework, you can't say that it hasn't impacted your thinking at all. Because if you say you can have morality outside of religion, you're only able to say that because you've grown up with that moral framework in the back of your mind anyway.
Yeah, anyone in the West, in a traditionally Christian country, who says that they recognize things like murder as bad because they're a good person rather than a religious person, the only reason that you recognize murder is bad is because it was one of the main 10 commandments. Thou shalt
Yeah.
not kill. Got
Well,
me
look at
there.
the tell them to look at atheistic states such as the USSR, look at China, and tell me that they knew moral right and wrong when Mao was responsible for the deaths of 60 million or however many. I think it's
Yeah.
around 100. They believe it's about 60 million for Mao. There was the Holodomor genocide of Christians in the USSR. They believe it's somewhere
That's,
between. It could
yeah.
be anywhere between 4 and 15 million
Yeah, I
because
was going to say
they
about
didn't
7 8.
care. Yeah, because they didn't even care enough to document how many people they were killing off. Tell that to the communists, the atheist communists in Spain who were burning churches with nuns inside, burning them
Yeah.
to death and killing children for being Christian. So don't tell me that you're moral without religion and it's inherent to every person, because these are atheistic people and these are people who hated Christianity and they were absolutely morally abhorrent.
I think the world would be a lot better if the person who wrote Genesis made sure to get it in there that the sixth commandment was, Thou shalt not kill unless thou art a good person. And then thou
Yeah,
art allowed to
exactly.
do
Yeah.
whatever thou want.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You shall not kill unless you yourself are able to become God. But actually, God killed people in the Old Testament.
Thou
He's
shalt not
God.
kill unless thou art killing a Nazi. What's a Nazi,
Whoa,
Moses?
whoa.
Your kids are going to
Everybody,
love it.
everybody,
Your kids are going to
everybody's a
love it
Nazi.
in 5,000 years. Yes. No, okay.
Oh.
But yeah, it's completely toxic to have no moral grounding for society. If you build your castle on quicksand, it's gonna sink. So you need to.
That's a nice quote.
Oh well, yeah, thanks. I don't know where I got it from. My brain somewhere. But you gotta build yourself up on something. You gotta have foundations. So it's good that a society has some sort of ingrained moral framework.
I think we've talked about the morality embedded within Rerum Novarum, and I think it's a good chance to segue into the modern day with the lack of moral framework in today's society. There are two main things we want to talk about that have occurred recently.
Yeah,
Um,
this week, the two big stories, really. I wanted to go through
yeah.
this quote I had, but all right.
Okay. No, we'll do
No,
the
no, I'm
quote and then we'll
joking.
move
I'm
on to them.
joking. We did cover
Okay.
most of them, to be fair, because we talked about the respect for religion and justice. We didn't talk about the progress of the arts and the trade, but you can see it with things like modern art that there is a decreasing respect for aesthetics and meaning, and a kind of a
Yeah.
subjugation to a constructed meaning, not a real meaning. You can say all meaning is constructed, I suppose, but when someone slaps paint across a wall or tapes a banana to the wall, this isn't art in the sense that it isn't a statement, a sincere statement from the soul of your
You just don't
beliefs.
understand it, Fraser. You're not
I
as
don't.
cool as
I do
us.
not understand it. Unfortunately, I'm not a monkey. I don't understand the banana. The abundant yield of the land. Yeah, we ended up covering a lot of this. The only other thing I would want to say about the on progress part, the social aspects of Rerum Novarum, and this is a great document, by the way. It's not that long. It's about 50, 60 paragraphs, some of which are about 6, 7 lines, some of which about 10, 20. I recommend reading it for yourself if you're interested in not just theology, but statecraft and how countries should be
It's not a
run.
very long read. It's not a very
No,
long read at all.
nah, it takes you about half an hour if you've got a decent reading speed. If you don't, an hour. If you're even faster, maybe 20 minutes. The last thing I want to say is that Pope Leo name drops the OGs. He says, among the many and grave duties of rulers who would do their best for the people, the first and chief is to act with strict justice, that justice which is called distributive. Very
Yep.
close, Pope Leo. You were almost there, but yes. No, that finishes everything I want to talk about for the social aspects.
In that case, then I will let you
Move us on
discuss
to
the
the political
first.
stuff.
Yeah, the first one. We're going to go in chronological order. The
Yeah,
first one
it
we
was
want to talk about. They're both murders in America. The first
yeah.
one, which I'll let you discuss, happened as on a tube, was it?
Yeah. Anyone watching this episode the moment it comes out, which will probably be like a week or two from now, maybe 3, 4, maybe 2 months. We don't know. Anyone watching this soon after it publishes will know this story, hopefully. And if you don't, or if this comes out later than we expect, then I invite you strongly to revisit it because it is a tragedy. The murder of Irina Zarutska, basically, it's just one in a long line of homicides committed in America. This time it was with a knife, but
We will say right here, there's a trigger warning. We are going to talk about since both of these murders were very graphic.
oh yeah, insanely graphic. That all murder is,
Yes,
really. You don't get a nice
yes,
murder. But yeah,
no,
no,
absolutely.
I guess this is a trigger warning. Basically, it was an unprovoked attack. She was stabbed in the neck, left
Three
to.
times.
Was it 3 times? I thought it was just the one.
Yeah, yeah. So she got on the
Oh my
train. She
god.
sat down.
Yeah.
She didn't look around. She didn't speak to anybody.
As
Another
you don't
gentleman
need
was
to, or you
behind her.
shouldn't need to in a safe world, really.
No, no, no. So there was a gentleman behind her. She never even looked at him, never said a word to him. She never knew him. About, was it 10 minutes into the journey? On CCTV, you can watch him whip out a little, well, I say little, it's quite a large flip blade, switchblade, or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
And he's smiling at it. He stands up, and there's other people watching him hold this blade, and not one of them says anything. And then he stabs her 3 times in the throat. Nobody gets up to help. He gets off the train. So at this point, the danger's gone. He's off the train. This woman is there crying and bleeding out, and not one person goes to help her. I watched the video. After about 2 minutes, the blood is piling all on the floor. She then collapses on the floor. After being collapsed on the floor with blood everywhere, it takes another 90 seconds for one of the other, I believe it's about 10 people on the train, all of who have seen this, and the danger's gone. It takes another 90 seconds of her already being dead for somebody to even go and like prod her body to see if she's even alive.
It's just
It's dreadful.
harrowing, absolutely harrowing. You like to think when you live in a first world country, a Western country, that people are generally decent and people are willing to protect one another, stick their necks out for one another, even if there is danger. But even then, if there's not danger, to at least come over and try and help you once you've been harmed, to try and offer you
We must say though,
some aid.
there's some context to the stabbing. The context is, in our opinion, it was a racially motivated attack. So the attacker was a gentleman of some kind of African origin, and at his arrest, he shouts the words, "I stabbed that white bitch. I stabbed her. I got that white girl." And he mentions her race repeatedly for being the reason why he did it. There's no other reason that he ever gives. And for context, the woman he stabbed was a white. We believe she's Ukrainian, so
She was a white Ukrainian refugee, yes.
yeah, so she'd fled the war. And the bystanders, all of whom saw this and refused and didn't help at all, they were also of African American descent. So not only do we have the racial attack on her for being white, we then have all these other bystanders who are not in any danger because the guys got off the train, and none of them even go to help her until after she's dead. And it is very harrowing. What's also, I think I saw, I might be corrected on this, but I remember reading an article saying I think he has a half brother, and his half brother is currently in jail because he shot a white woman in the face 25 times. We're not sure if that was a racially motivated attack, but yeah, the offender of this attack, the subway one who killed her.
I think his name is DeCarlos Brown?
Yeah, I think that rings a
DeCantios
bell.
Brown? Yeah,
I think
something.
he had 16 prior convictions, and
14.
every time the
Yeah.
14 was it? Yeah, and the
Yeah.
judge kept letting him out.
Yes.
What a terrible society.
It's not strictly pertinent to Rerum Novarum as we discussed it, but there is certainly some echoes of what Pope Leo discussed in regards to how a society should function, what a society should be striving to do for its people, and the methods in which it provides it. And one of those is to strictly and properly mete out justice where it is necessary to prevent harm to its citizens. And we see in this case, if you divorce it completely from the racial aspect, which many right-wing commentators are currently trying to emphasize, and which it's not the place of this current podcast or episode to discuss. If you divorce it from all racial aspects, this was an unprovoked attack by someone who had engaged in 14 other unprovoked criminal activities, and who had each time been allowed to return into society without any reformative measures or any punitive measures. This is someone who, in a society that still utilizes the death penalty, should have received it. If only
Well, I
because,
don't think they do they, in New York? I think they've stopped using it on a state level.
well, American society certainly still utilizes the
Yes,
death
yeah, yeah.
penalty across itself. Not in
In
every,
some states,
not in
yeah.
every place, yes, but this is certainly a society that is accustomed to the idea of the death penalty in a way that we, in the UK or
Aren't.
in France or in Germany or whatever, having banned it in the last 50 years, aren't. This society
Yeah.
that is accustomed to it and could, perhaps better than us, see its merits. And certainly, one of the merits is proven here, because had this person been stopped after their first conviction, or their second, or even their third or fourth, perhaps at
Even
their
after their
fifth,
13th, mate. Even after their
even
13th
after their
offence.
13th, if they had simply been punished to an appropriate degree, which after 4 or 5 assaults or murders probably would be capital punishment, then this woman would still be alive. This woman, by the
Yeah.
way, who, to cross the divide of the culture war, in every way epitomized the idea of the good immigrant. This person was completely abandoned by the people who she considered herself an ally of. She, by the way,
Yep.
had a Black Lives Matter poster in her room and
Yep.
supported that cause quite. She not only purports to be an ally of this, but she purported to love this culture, seeing as she fled there. And in many ways, you expect that the oppressed African American community in the United States should feel kinship towards other oppressed minority groups, such as the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians who are fleeing war and are having to come to an unfamiliar country, as dozens of groups have to America before, all of whom in some way felt oppression. You would expect there to be a degree of fraternity, but it simply didn't happen. It simply didn't exist
What's
here.
interesting is that I didn't see this case. I didn't see it mentioned for a fair few days after it happened, and there's been a lot of criticism of which news networks chose not to cover it. I believe that the Instagram, for example, on CNN, even though it's prime American murder, unprovoked murder at that, very gruesome. I believe CNN's Instagram still hasn't even reported on it. I'm not sure if they did on their television channels, but I know they didn't straight away
Mm-hmm.
because it took I think it took multiple days of people calling them out for hypocrisy of not speaking on this issue before they even covered it.
It is very
But speaking
hypocritical.
of the death penalty, we were just talking about then. The second one we want to talk about, the second horrific
I wanted to say
incident.
one more thing about Irina Zarutska,
Yeah, go for it.
just
Go for
because
it. Yeah, yeah.
you basically summed it up just then. I said that she was abandoned by those that she felt herself an ally of. She was abandoned by the legal system of the
Yep.
country in which she had put herself into care of. Because this judge had persisted in allowing this individual to get off for a 14th time. She was also, as you just said, abandoned by the media, who
Yep.
generally are very quick to exaggerate and hyperbolize these racial murders, especially when they're white on black,
Yep.
and to jump to the aid of these causes, to jump to the aid of immigrants, for example. So for these institutions to fail or to be absent when this woman was murdered, it shows a level of hypocrisy that I think people need to understand. People need to come to terms with the fact that the media, in many ways, is just not an ally of regular people.
They actually stir up more hatred, I think, than anything.
Yeah,
So their selective coverage
yep,
brings out outrage from people because they're not covering certain things,
yep,
and then the way they talk about it. I believe when it was George Floyd, they used the term "murdered"
yeah,
before the trial, but then for this young woman, they said she died rather than
mhm,
saying murdered, and their reasoning for that was we can't say she was murdered yet because the gentleman's not been convicted of murder. It's pre-trial, so
mhm.
that kind of treating the same kind of case differently based on who's the victim, that actually that causes more division than anything else.
The murder of George Floyd racked America for weeks, if not months, with violent crime and rioting, political uncertainty and instability, and just all around toxicity and hostility. But the murder of, well, Irina Zarutska or any of the dozens of white individuals killed by black African Americans, none of these have resulted in a similar response from the right wing. What was the name of that athlete at the track meet who was stabbed to death for trying to take a seat?
What's
Do you remember
terrible,
Do you remember
Fraser, is
that?
that I remember the case. What's terrible is that I can't even remember their name because I see so many
It
of these
happens so often,
cases,
doesn't it?
and they're always the reason why. Well, just to counterbalance that a little bit, for George Floyd, I do understand why it was slightly different because it was from a person with a position of authority. Derek Chauvin was a police officer, so I can definitely understand the difference. In that case, they're saying it's oppression by the state, whereas this is private individual on a private individual. But that aside, it should certainly get way more attention
Than it has
than what
done.
it was given. But yeah, as you were saying, that individual that was stabbed, I see this
Austin
so
Metcalf.
commonly.
Yeah.
And because we don't get as much media coverage. There's no rioting. There's nothing like that. The names just kind of so quickly fade into existence, and that's actually another sign of moral degeneracy. The fact that we're so oblivious to such horrific crime because it happens so frequently.
It happens so frequently, yeah. It's not a sign of individual moral degeneracy, but of societal moral degeneracy. It's not on us to
Yes,
remember every single name
yes,
of the deceased, of the murdered. It's on society to remember it as a whole, and unfortunately, we just don't. We flip from social issue to social issue, from tragedy to tragedy, feeling that emotion for a time, allowing ourselves to feel grief or rage, but perhaps a synthetic kind of grief and a synthetic kind of anger drummed up inside of us by the media. The media manipulates us expertly into feeling these things, but we don't truly hang on to them in the same way that if a close family member were to die, you would hang on to that grief for years.
yes, absolutely.
It's quite sickening, really, the level of manipulation on show. But yes, Austin
Um,
Metcalf was the
what I was going to
teenager
say,
stabbed to death.
what I was
So
going to say was we were just about to segue on to the second
yes, yes, the
event, and the
second
reason why I mentioned
terrible
it just then,
tragedy of the week.
I've literally just seen breaking news on that, so I'll let you introduce what happened before I mention it.
Yeah, it was literally only yesterday, as of the recording of this podcast. Uh, the right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk at a speaking event in Utah Valley University, which he was well known for. It was an event in which he invited those who disagreed with him to come forward and speak to him publicly in a debate format. He invited, essentially, opposition to his beliefs publicly before a crowd of, it looked like thousands of people. At one of these events, Charlie Kirk was shot fatally in the neck, murdered by someone. Although who it is, it remains up in the air. We've only just gotten reports. I think you're probably going to bring one of those up right now about who it is. But he was murdered. And I think the more socially relevant aspect of this case, not being the murder, it's not so much about gun crime as it is about the absolute lack of empathy of people. You see a massive number of people on what people consider the left wing, liberal end of society, actively cherishing the death of Charlie Kirk and seeing it as a cause to celebrate.
Yeah, I completely agree. The breaking news is that somebody's been taken into custody for the assassination. A 22-year-old Utah resident named Tyler Robinson.
Yeah, that was.
I'm reading
I saw about 20 minutes ago the same sort of thing. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
I'm reading the description of it, and I don't know how much credibility I'm going to give to this arrest. The authorities were contacted by this gentleman's father.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to have no kind of prior military training, police training, nothing like that at all. And if my memory serves me correctly, the gentleman who shot and killed Kirk, was it 200 meters away? It was
200
some fair
yards.
distance,
200
200
yards,
yards
which
away.
is for slightly less. Sorry.
But
Yeah,
he was
slightly
up on the
less.
roof as well, so it was a different angle, and he was wearing tactical gear, and he shot him and managed to get away very quickly. Because there was the whole distraction. So another gentleman was arrested originally because the gentleman was shouting, "I shot him! I got him! I shot him!" So all the police officers rushed to that gentleman, who I believe was a 62-year-old male. And whilst he was shouting that, it allowed the real perpetrator to get away. But from watching the video, And if anybody's not seen the video, it's a very harrowing, very graphic video.
It just
But
happens so
watching the
suddenly.
video,
It just
it
happens
also seems
instantly.
like a very professional job, though. The person who did the shooting was there very quickly, in, out, one bullet, direct hit. But the person they've arrested, this 22-year-old from Utah, whose father has handed him in, has got no training with guns at all. So I'm not too sure how much credibility I'm going to give this arrest. But interestingly, we were speaking earlier about the death penalty in America. I've also read that apparently Trump has signed, I think it might be an executive.
Executive
What's the
order.
word they use?
Executive order.
That's it. I think it's an executive order. He's signed saying whoever's convicted for the murder will receive the death penalty. Yeah, your thoughts, Fraser?
I think that it's pretty terrible to see the total, first of all, lack of empathy from individuals towards Charlie Kirk's family for the loss of a father and a husband. You may not have agreed with him, and he may have put people into danger with his rhetoric, or somehow, even though he never did it specifically and himself directly, he may have encouraged violence against some individuals.
By the way, we must be very clear that we wholeheartedly disagree with him on some issues such as Israel, and yet we here acknowledge that is no reason to celebrate the death of anybody, let alone the murder of somebody who's got such a young, especially since she's got such a young family, because it's a wife without a husband, children without a father.
He was only 31.
He was a
his
young
wife's
man, yeah.
younger. One of his daughters, I'm not sure if this is the elder or the younger daughter, it was 3 years old, and she, alongside her sister and the mum, were all present when he was killed. They were all present when he was murdered.
His entire thing as well has been encouraging respectful dialogue and discourse, especially at universities. And yet the whole thing is that somebody has listened to him talk about the need of having debates and not using political violence, and then just killed him.
Responded with political violence.
Yeah, in a way, it really does prove his point that as a society, morally, we are collapsing. The point that we are killing people based on their political beliefs, not even what they've done.
His defense of debate and his advancement of debate as like a political bridge is going to be lost now. I think that is an opportunity that we've just lost.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of people commenting that the death of Charlie Kirk is also the death of tolerance from people on the right, because Charlie Kirk was a very outspoken person against any kind of violence being used on the right.
In terms of techniques, he was very moderate.
I agree. This is going to lead people. Who are they going to look up to? I remember there's a lot of people in the UK, even over here, where he's less known than America, and many of us got involved in politics because of we saw these kind of Benjamin Shapiro rage baits, college campus, Charlie Kirk, like these kind of people that Charlie Kirk set up under Turning Point America and then Turning Point UK and England. They're the reason that many of us, even if we don't agree with their politics, got us into wanting to listen to debates and actually engage in debates. But who are these people going to listen to now? Now they're going to start listening to people who aren't so anti-violence, and in my thinking, it's going to be a tinderbox situation, waiting for a match to be struck.
It's gonna continue to escalate. It seems, I don't think it's unfair to say this kind of like sleepwalking in disaster moment. Perhaps this is somewhat dramatic, but it's almost like an assassination of Franz Ferdinand deal, where it might seem quite inconspicuous and uneventful in the long term. I'm not saying that a world war is going to start from this, by the way, or even a civil war, because that's what some people on social media are saying right now, that this may be the beginning of a low-level civil war. I don't believe in that either, but I do believe that kill someone.
Not to jump in.
Yeah,
not to jump in, but
I
saw a report yesterday. I'm not sure how true it was, but I saw multiple people reporting on it on social media that after Charlie Kirk's death, I shouldn't say death, after he was murdered, there have been reports of bombing threats to DNC conventions, and I believe one of them, so the Democratic National Convention, or whatever it is,
Congress Convention,
something like that. One of them had to be evacuated by the military because of a genuine bomb threat. I'm not sure how true that is, but I definitely saw it reporting online.
Yeah, what I was saying was that to kill someone who, in his actions, was so moderate, even if his speech was not moderate,
yes,
is essentially to kill the person who has the highest chance of bridging the gap with you if you stand opposed to him ideologically, and of debating and arguing in defense of your rights if his side were to ever triumph.
Exactly.
Because in the same, the example I used, Franz Ferdinand, in the same style as the Franz Ferdinand example, Franz Ferdinand, the Crown Prince of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was one of the most outspoken defenders of Slavic rights within the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was murdered by Slavs. He was murdered by Serbians and Bosnians. How do you expect people to heal a gap when the one person who is trying to actively hold both sides together is punished for his attempt? It's just quite demoralizing, really. Not because I
You're
think
right.
that the right wing is going to be weakened by this in any way, the right wing to which I subscribe. I think it's demoralizing because, unfortunately, it increases the likelihood that the result will be gotten through blood rather than sweat.
And to link it to Rerum Novarum, it just the last thing from me is that it just, as we mentioned earlier, it's another sign of societal breakdown and
Yes.
moral degeneracy.
It falls under a respect for religion and justice. There's just no sense of duty or love for the law of the land. People will break the law if they feel it is necessary in order to protect their political fantasies or realities, depending on where you stand.
But we don't want to end this on a negative.
Well, this is the start. Yeah. Why I'm going to say something very negative. I would personally make the prediction that this is the start of an increased period of political violence, not just in the US but across the West, because there is simply, I don't see a way for people to back down from this. Sorry, on to you for your positivity.
Was it the you will go into positivity in just 1 second.
Okay. You
I
want
think
to clap back?
I saw I'm not sure which country it was in South America. It might have been Colombia, where the person was just shot and killed. Well, this was slightly before Charlie Kirk. I think he was the right wing guy for the presidential election or whatever it was. He was killed. And then if we're looking in Germany as well, they're coming up towards their election where the AfD are winning in the polls. And prior to this, I think it was what seven of them have now been seven killed or died mysteriously.
Well,
which is unprecedented.
Yes, there's 7 candidates have passed away in Germany, 2 weeks ahead of the local elections.
Under mysterious circumstances as well.
All of them were over 40, I must admit. So all of them were at an age where health issues may begin to build, but they were certainly not at an age, except for 1 or 2 of them who were over 60, where a health issue could suddenly turn terminal.
Instantly.
Yes, suddenly turn terminal and result in their death. For them all to die at the same time, 7 of them to die within a week of one another, ahead of some of the most important elections in Germany's not just recent but entire political history, is suspect. And
many of them were also predicted to win those elections as well.
Oh yes. Well, I think you could say of any AfD candidate, I think the AfD in general is predicted to win the next German election, the next nationwide election.
They're strongest in the east.
Yeah, they are.
There's still some support of the SPD in the south, and in that one, I can never remember where it is, but in the east of Germany, there's like, if you look at a map, there's just one dot of red.
That'll be Berlin. It's Berlin.
Yeah, that's got to be, hasn't it?
It's Brandenburg, yeah. The one dot of east in East Germany, the one dot of red in East Germany is always Berlin. Because you see Saxony, Pomerania, I believe Hanover is decent. That's like in the central left, if I look at German Bundesländer.
And then the northeast is often more towards the CDU, CSU, or whatever it's... The Christian Democratic Union.
Yeah, that's more the south and the southwest, I think. Yeah, the south and the southwest are the ones that are a bit more like temperate, I believe. If I look at the German map of German political results, last German election, dude, literally perfect borders. East Germany is entirely AfD except for Berlin, which is CDU or SPD, and then the rest of the country is CDU. Essentially, with small hotspots of SPD or Green or Left, and there's 1 or 2 AfD spots in the Rhineland. But I think that's set to go up, and all of those, if you want to call them murders, It's unconfirmed at the moment, but all of those deaths occurred with candidates standing in Nord Rhine-Westphalia, which is in the west in a CDU stronghold.
Yeah.
So
But there has been a significant AFD presence recently.
yeah, across the whole country, the AFD is certainly
Well,
surging,
yeah.
and the
Yeah,
reasons
let's
for
let's
that
end on a
we'll have to discuss later. Another
let's end on a
episode.
positive.
Let's end on a positive. Positives. 2 new saints. 2 new people got canonized.
Yeah.
One of them was an Italian gentleman from the 1920s who I believe stood against fascism, and the other was a young gentleman who I believe he gave his life
He's
for
the
some
first Gen Z
cause.
saint, isn't he, or something like that?
Yes,
I think I read.
yes.
Yeah.
That was like the big selling point of it, that he was the first Gen Z. He died. His
Yeah.
name was Carlo Acutis. He died acute leukemia, aged
Dreadful.
15, but he had created a website documenting miracles, essentially.
Yes, I
Yes.
remember.
So
That's some positives for us.
that's a reasonable cause to dedicate yourself to. And then,
Absolutely.
yes, the other gentleman who was canonized was Frassiti, Pier Giorgio Frassati. He was a lay Dominican in the 1920s. He died aged 24, which is actually very tragic, and he was beatified for curing a man of tuberculosis,
Oh, nice.
which back then was not easy to cure.
No,
I don't know.
absolutely
I
not.
don't think it's very easy to cure now. It's antibiotics, isn't it? It's bacteria.
Yeah.
Either
But
way,
it's
that
not.
is something to end on. Go on, sorry.
Yeah. I was gonna say, well, it's definitely got easier in the modern day, but it's still not. It's very hard to do, especially with a lack of knowledge of what we know today. So yeah,
Yeah,
very
definitely.
interesting.
Yeah. No, that is
Yeah,
that's positives. Something positive to end on.
that's
We'll try and make a
that's
more positive
today's
episode next time.
yeah, that's today's episode. We thank you all for listening if you've made it this far. We're not sure how
Yes.
long the episode will end up being after the edits, but right now we're probably looking at about an hour and a half, I'd imagine.
The raw footage just came up to an hour and 42.
Oh wow, so if you've made it all the way to the end, thank you very much. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Do remember to comment down below if there's anything particular within distributist policies that you'd like us to talk about. And this is me, Sam, signing off, and Fraser.
I'm signing off as well. Hope to see you all next
Thank you.
time.
Bye bye.